I would like to, first of all, to welcome Laura Sewell at the Fanfare and the podcast. And we will speak about the Three Score album, but we do not need to talk so much because our conversation has been printed. So I would like then to go further to discuss some matters like what is the future of classical music, about the importance of musical education, and if we do still need a feminism. I've seen your videos with International Cello Institute for female artists, so I'm looking forward. So I would like just to start with the Three Score, and if you might tell me a little bit more of the background, the idea to bring your life story together on the CD is really very convincing from my point of view as critic, because there's so many recordings has been recorded for the 20th and 21st century that we have to ask ourselves every time we are recording how useful it might be for the afterworld. But this album has really a particular strong base why it should be released and bespoken and reviewed. So please tell me the story.
Well, I really have my parents to thank because they're very artistic people, and they all along have valued the importance of commissioning composers. And they've formed something called a commissioning club with like-minded friends in the Twin Cities, which went on for 25 years. They stopped doing it maybe a decade ago, but they commissioned important composers all over the world, actually, and did some very interesting commissions for notable groups, certainly not just Minnesota composers. But it started out when I was 21, about to turn 21, and my parents said, we'd like to commission a piece for your birthday. And there was a young composer in town here called Stephen Paulus, who later became quite well known. But I think it was either his very first commission or one of his very first, because he wasn't even quite 30 when my parents approached him. And I think at the time I thought, wow, that's kind of cool, but I didn't really get how wonderful a gift that was, that my parents did that, and how unusual that was. And he wrote a wonderful piece for cello. He's not a string player. He obviously did his research. He's a very smart composer. And all the signs of what he was to become really showed up, I think, in that piece. And I played it actually quite a few times since then through my life. And then 5 years later, they said, I had studied earlier in London with Jacqueline Du Pre when I was 17. I spent 6 months there, and it was really life-changing for me. I think about it all the time still. And a composer named Paul Schoenfield had recently moved to the Twin Cities at that point, and we had gotten to know him. And they approached him about writing a piece for me to commemorate that important time in my life, studying with her. And then, so he got the idea of actually doing British folk songs because she's English, and of doing sort of a suite of folk songs. And then he mentioned very casually to me at one point when we were rehearsing it together that the folk songs had sort of had a mood of somebody facing a terminal illness, sort of the stages a person goes through. Later, he kind of poo-pooed that and said, oh, I don't know about that. But I remember him saying it. So, it starts out, everything's fine in the first movement, and then it goes through all these grief, anger, denial. And then the final movement was really kind of spectacular because it's acceptance. And the way the piece ends, it sort of floats away. At least I think it sounds like that. It's just, it ends very peacefully and beautifully. The last movement's quite stunning, and it's the longest movement of the 6.
But just before we go to Jacqueline Du Pre, I would like to ask you a thing. To commission a piece for daughter's birthday implies in a way that you are not going to be scared by contemporary music. So how old have you been when you came in touch with contemporary music for the very first time? Because I see that you were sort of prepared to play contemporary music without fear to play some contemporary language, musical language. To work with.
Well, I'd certainly heard contemporary music. My father's a violinist, and I don't remember if I'd played anything very contemporary before. Well, I probably had. But of course, you don't know what you're going to get when you ask someone to compose for you. Actually, the piece that Stephen wrote is sort of neoclassical, but we didn't know that that's what he would come up with. So in a way, I suppose it was a good first piece to play by a composer for me. But I guess I wasn't afraid of that. By then I was third year at Juilliard. I mean, I think I had played things, maybe not solo cello things, but certainly modern music.
To those time, who was your favorite contemporary composer then?
Then,
in America?
Who would I have said? Well, maybe Shostakovich.
Right.
I
said American,
I still love Shostakovich, but that's there was. I don't know what I would have said at that time. Actually, I would go back in my head and try to think how I might have answered that. But
interesting. It was with me the same when I was here. But I'm Russian. I'm from Moscow, so we are growing up in the idol of Shostakovich and Prokofiev.
Oh,
but nevertheless, I remember when I was 3 years old, my parents has taken me to the concert event, which was dedicated to a round birthday of Alfred Schnittke.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that was the first time when I've heard contemporary music, and then it had to pass almost 20 years before, maybe a little less, before I decided myself to play contemporary music. I was so depressed. Yes, I was. I remember I came there to the big hall of Moscow State Conservatory in expectation to listen what I always like to listen, like Bach and Mozart and Tchaikovsky, my favorite composer then. And an hour of Schnittke has almost killed my musical sense. But I was 3. So I see you never had this traumatizing experiences with contemporary music.
No, I can remember my father practicing things that he would be like, "Oh, this is so much work, and I'm not sure I like it." He had to play things like that, and but I didn't feel that way actually about the Paulus at all, or the Schoenfield. When I feel so fortunate. They're both such good pieces, and they should be played and heard a lot more than they are. So that's another reason I did the album. I've been meaning to record these pieces for all these decades and just never got to it. And then because these are wonderful additions to the cello repertoire.
Yes.
And then the impetus for the album title, 3 Score, is a play on the number 60. Do you know that a score, an old-fashioned term for 20? So 3 Score. And I was about to turn 60 when I decided to finally do this. So it took me that long. I'd played the pieces in public a few times, as I said, since they were written. And other people have played them, but not very many. And so they deserve to be better known.
Of course, it's very personal when such a dedication takes place. How was the very first performance of those pieces?
Which piece?
The very first performance.
Of each piece? Good. The Paulus, I played it on a recital right after my birthday when I turned 21 with a longtime family friend, a wonderful pianist. She's since died. And she loved the piece. She wanted to do it all the time for years afterwards. And we did a few more times together. And then with Paul, the Schoenfield, I actually did the premiere with Paul Schoenfield himself, who is a fantastic pianist. He was a wonderful collaborator. And we played it as part of a British music festival that was done at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 1985. And that was another reason he thought I should do something English. And Jacqueline Du Pre is English. And other things on the program were Elgar and Benjamin Britten. Not that I played, but those were. So this was sort of the new piece on the program. And that was a very exciting concert to be part of, because it was a sort of a big music festival that went on for like a week. Different pieces that were by English composers or sort of had English dedications of some sort.
What do you like more, to perform contemporary music which is written for you, or to play established repertoire like Brahms or Beethoven?
Well, it's hard to beat Brahms and Beethoven, I will be honest. I would have to say probably the standard cello repertoire.
Indeed.
But a really great new piece is a great joy to play, because you're discovering it. There's no sort of traditions yet about how to play it. It's fun to work with composers. These composers, including David Evan Thomas, the other piece, they're absolutely fabulous to work with. They're very open to changes. If something didn't work for the cello, they really listened and made changes. That didn't hardly happen because they were very well written pieces, but they're very open-minded.
And what is your really favorite program you would love to perform? If I would ask you, could you please give a recital next week? And you can choose the most things which you really love to play. Which program will this be?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love both Mendelssohn cello sonatas, and I think I play them really well. So maybe
There's quite rare played pieces, by the way.
I know, but they're getting more and more. Mendelssohn is sort of, I feel like, gaining more and more sort of respect. I think he's a wonderful composer. Mendelssohn D major sonata, I love. So maybe that. Maybe I would choose one of these three pieces on the album, because all of them are very appealing and have a personal connection now. I love the music of Robert Schumann. The Adagio and Allegro is a wonderful piece that I think
quite hard to play, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is. And I love the Beethoven sonatas, all of them, but I'm especially fond of number 5. The one with the fugue. That sounds futuristic, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. But the second movement is.
And the second movement is really profound.
Yeah, that's clear. But if we look back on the music history, to the time of Brahms and Beethoven and Mendelssohn made exactly the turn from new to ancient music to older music to Bach. But
That's
to
right.
those times, to perform older music by composers who are dead was completely sort of strange.
That's right.
And it was established tradition to perform only contemporary pieces. Usually composer and player were one and the same person. And so many pieces were written. It was all the time like up to date. Like nowadays we would say we write news and not novels. So that was the tradition how music was written. Since it has changed, the style of contemporary composition has changed, because back then composer was basically obliged to compose likely for the audience, and then in the 60s, in the time after the Second World War, composers started to compose on their taste how they like to, and it was maybe also social context of fight against the established society of before the war. So it was sort of actually rebelling against the conservatism, which was connected to the fascism. But the result of it is the situation that the contemporary music loses every time in the comparison to the established repertoire. So what do you think, what can be changed? How does look the right approach to bring it at least to more or less same level, that the composers of today are as welcome as Brahms and Beethoven, without saying that they are. Of course, it's hard to reach this height, but if to time of Beethoven nobody would play Beethoven, it is a huge question if he would be that good,
Radical, yeah. Well, I actually get the sense that it is changing. Almost every classical concert I go to, there's contemporary music on it. I have to say, at least in the United States, I think there's a great effort to play music. And now there's much more music being played by women composers, dead or alive. I mean, that's really, there's a resurgence of that, which I think is fantastic. Um, there's a lot of younger players I've noticed who are very invested in playing new music, and they do it really well. And some of them, that's all they want to do. I actually know quite a few young people, like in their 20s and 30s. They are so excited about playing new music. Uh, so I kind of feel like it's happening.
Yeah,
Personally, I have not. I mean, some of it you love, some of it you can't wait for it to be over, to be honest. I mean, and then there's everything in between. But the good stuff will last, will stand the test of time, like Beethoven did, Brahms did. I do believe that the cream rises to the top.
have you ever experienced from your student side, oh, Mrs. Sewell, I would like to study one or another piece from this album? I liked it so much. Please, can you replace the Beethoven sonata in the exam program to one of those?
Oh, you mean which one would I recommend?
No, if you have heard that students asks you to teach them this repertoire after have listened to your album.
Which one would I choose?
Yes.
It depends on the playing level of the hardest piece in the album is the Schoenfield, technically, definitely. The easiest is the Paulus, and the David Evan Thomas is somewhere in between. So none of them are really easy to play. So which one? Maybe the David Evan Thomas. It has some very interesting challenges, and it works very well, and it's sort of 14 minutes straight through. It's an interesting piece to play. Sort of, you kind of have to have stamina to play it live because it is a straight through. And it has some very tricky moments actually for the cello. It's sort of it would be an in-between and a great piece for a student to negotiate, to learn to do.
Possibly by including these contemporary pieces into the regular educational repertoire. This is the way how we can establish contemporary music.
That's
actually,
right.
and
That's
bring
right.
it into the repertoire. So did you make your own edition? There's your bowings, your fingerings, your marks in the music, right?
Well, I did. I mean, they're not published, but yes, I very much did. Yes.
Would you like to publish this in your edition?
I wouldn't mind because, well, none of them needed a huge amount of help with like bowings or anything. But yes, there were things that I had to figure out, how am I going to do this? A lot of it had more to do with finding fingerings that worked, because there were some very tricky things in, especially the Schoenfield and the David Evan Thomas piece, that just, to find it how to do it on the cello. But cellists find their own way with fingerings. I'm less inclined to impose my fingerings on somebody, especially another professional cellist. But I wouldn't mind, obviously, doing an edition. But
I
I
remember
think
there was
they're published, and they're people can figure them out, I think.
I remember there was a memorable interview with Jacqueline Du Pre, who was not anymore able to play, and she was explaining the real reason what for edition is needed. So she has said, and she meant the edition for Elgar cello concerto, which she was really like obsessed to finish before she's gonna die or not able to work anymore. And to me, it was the biggest motivation to go into the editing. Exactly this was, she said that musical marks are there in a score, but how exactly to do them, how to apply this, that's another question. How do I express with my bow and my fingers sforzato? How do I express one or another indication of feelings like amabile or whatever, affettuoso? How exactly is this to do on the instrument? And that's actually the point. Did she ever mention this approach to the editions? How
Yes,
was it?
yes. Well, she was very interesting to have lessons with because it was all in her memory. Everything she did, she'd say, "Ah, I did," and you could see her. She'd be like imagining it. Everything. Everyone sort of has had this impression of her that she was just, spur of the moment, but really, it was all up here. Um, so, but she was also she wasn't one of those who was absolutely clinically held by what was on the page. She would say, "Well, that just sounds better. Do it that way." So, I've had other teachers have said, "You can't do that. There's a slur there," or, there's an accent. She was a little bit more, as long as it was expressing something, that was really first and foremost with her, which I'm sure is not surprising to anybody to hear that, because she was such an expressive player.
And how did this affected your style to play music? How much did you take from her of creative approach to the musical implications and text, and how much is it differently from her vision of it?
Well, I took that a lot, especially at that age. Um, and there was even a stage when I wanted to imitate her, but you can't really imitate her. She was one of a kind. But this all the slides, I mean,
Yes.
I loved that style. I think it got sort of tamed a little as I matured and studied with other people. But um, I love the fact that she was a little bit less, rigid about having to stick with, you must do it this way. I think that affected me quite a lot.
What makes her so unique is your emotional freedom and expression of this, which is sounding. So to me, it is like 100% of what is in the music and what is projected out of this music.
Mhm.
And this emotional impact, let's speak about Brahms, for example, her second Brahms cello sonata. It's just amazing. How does she do it? How does she makes it breathe? How does she makes it so exciting that you really feel your feelings while
Yep.
you're listening and watching her? How did she do it?
Well, I almost got the sense she fully embodied the music. It was almost, well, first of all, she could do anything she imagined in her head. She could just do because she was so one of a kind of gifted. So literally, I think she just got it and went, ah, and then it sort of came out. It was so intuitive, I think, with her sort of talent, um, that and she completely embodied whatever the mood was at the moment of that moment in the music. She just was it. And I think that's why she was such a captivating performer to watch and to listen to. It was like one of those, a great, great, great actor who is fully feeling the emotions that they're not just pretending to, they really are. I think she was similar in how she played.
Was this affecting you as student? Could she make you as well free to feel and express in her classes? I can imagine that it was quite a huge difference after Leonard Rose to her, or was it rather similar?
No, see, I studied with her before Leonard Rose.
Ah, right.
Yes, I had graduated early from high school, so it was what would have been my senior year in high school. I actually went to England,
Right.
so um, I was very impressionable. I was still basically a teenager, and so yes, it was a little different than going to Rose. Rose was much more what I was used to, I mean, more traditional approach, very inspiring, but in a much more prescribed way. For instance, the first thing all the students had to do when we were going to start a new piece is we'd find another student who had played it, and our instructions were to copy in all his markings into our
Right.
music. So go find so and so. He played it last year. Borrow his music, copy in all the bowings and fingerings, and then practice it before you come to your first lesson with that piece. So that was very different than, you know, Whereas for a lesson with Jacqueline Du Pre, I would practice it and I'd go, I'd have figured those things out on my own, or I would just be following whatever happened to be in the published part.
Yeah, it's a really
Yeah,
two very different approaches.
very
So
different approaches.
can
Yes.
you tell me how was it for you to come? There's the song by Sting in Englishman in New York, but in your case it was the other way around. So it's American
Right.
Girl, you came in to London. How was it
Yeah.
to you?
Oh, oh, I lived with an English family. They were wonderful. Um, the parents were musicians, and the children, who were a little younger than me, all played instruments. So they welcomed me, and they had a flat on their third floor, and they kind of left me to my own devices, but I would have dinner with them every night. They were very, very kind. I got a huge kick out of being in England. First of all, I kept a running list of all the words that have different meanings, even though they're English, that I would misunderstand. What do you mean? Like jumper. Jumper means sweater over in England, and a jumper in America is like a dress you put on that you wear another, shirt underneath. And I did not know what they were talking about when they would say, "You're cold, you need to go put on a jumper." That was just like, oh, like, I don't think so. um, but so still have it. It was like 5 pages, just all these words that I would, and I kept a diary. The diary is quite hilarious to read now. All my observations about the people I encountered and the family I lived with, and it's really a fun read. Actually, I get it out every 5 years or so, and I read through it, and it's kind of amusing. I'm
And the
really glad I
cultural
had.
differences. So
Oh
do you
yeah,
think uh, the cultures are pretty different, right?
yeah, I thought
So how
so.
did you get along? How did you get along with this?
Well, I got put in my place a couple of times. I mean, this is 1976, 77. It's quite a while ago. I once bought, I forget what it was, like a sandwich when I was out and about, and I started to eat it as I was walking down the street. And a very proper British woman said, "Why are that's not proper. Why are you eating the sandwich as you walk along?" Now, probably that's not the case anymore in England, but I couldn't even imagine in America, if you had to eat on the run, you did. I mean, someone actually stopped me and said, "What? How rude of you." So things like that, I thought, "Are you kidding? Oh my gosh." And then I was very embarrassed that somehow I hadn't gotten that message, but there were a few things
did,
like that happened.
did you get some friends there?
Yes, I did. Although it was hard because I was not enrolled in a program of any sort. So I lived with this family, and they were very busy all day long. So I was on my own. I would practice a lot. And then I would go like see a site on my own. I mean, and I'm an extrovert. That was really hard for me. Like I would look in my guidebook of London and go, "Oh, I should go to this museum." So I would figure out how to go by myself. It was hard, actually. As a 17-year-old, I'd get on the tube and I'd figure it out, but I understood that I was there, and I was very fortunate, and I couldn't waste that opportunity. So I sightseed all by myself. And then in the evenings, I would look forward to it because the family would all be home. And then it was sort of like my social time. So I did meet some people. They were very kind about introducing me, and people, I got to know a few people, but it was basically kind of a solitary experience for me. But I sure got a lot
Amazing, amazing. Did you play any chamber music in this time there?
Uh, well, there again, the family I lived with were musical, so they did set up a few chamber music gatherings. Those were really fun. They invited friends and people who had kids around my age. That they really tried their best, but I mean, they had lives to lead, and you know, but
So
it was a really good growing experience for me to have to
amazing.
all of
Of course, Jacqueline Du Pre is an idol for many of us musicians, and not only. And of course, I can't wait the opportunity to ask you to describe one day or class with her. So you are coming to her place in Hampstead. She was living, right? So
that. Yep.
how was it? Please give
Well,
me a
First
with
of all,
you?
she lived in this beautiful place that had actually been where Margot Fontaine lived, the famous ballerina. She had been married to a diplomat who was shot, and he became a paraplegic, I believe, and so she had the entire apartment redone to accommodate a wheelchair. And so when she heard about what happened to Jacqueline Du Pre, her husband had died by that point, I believe. She offered this beautiful apartment to Du Pre and Barenboim to move into because it was all set up for somebody in a wheelchair. And it was a beautiful place. It was tucked away. In fact, the first time I had to find it, I wasn't sure I was at all going there. This is before GPS or anything. I had these written directions, and it was like behind. You had to sort of walk down this tiny little narrow. It was very hidden, but inside it was just beautiful. It was almost like an old building that had been gutted, and then it had like brick walls and a beautiful garden that you could look out. It was really lovely. Okay, so maybe I don't know which one I should describe. Um, Maybe the one time I showed up, and Barenboim wasn't there often, but one time he was, and he answered the door, and he said, "Hello, you must be Laura." He was very friendly, and he had just been in Minneapolis like a few weeks earlier, and my parents had gone to hear him and had gone backstage evidently, and you mentioned that, oh, our daughter is in London studying with your wife. And so when he greeted me, he said, "I just met your mommy and daddy." I thought, oh, that's awfully familiar. But anyway, so he was very nice. But well, she had a full-time caregiver, a very nice woman who would get her all sort of prepared for the lesson. And often that would be what she would do that day because she would get very tired. So she would be beautifully dressed, and like her hair had been sort of, someone had helped her. So she always looked really beautiful. And they would wheel her in, and sometimes she would serve tea. Like she'd say, "Would you like some tea?" And she would actually serve it, and it was hard to watch because at that point she had already was developing a real tremor. So her pouring tea, I wasn't going to say anything, but she would be, kind of, but she wanted so much to be sort of social, and she was very kind and fun actually to be around. It's funny sometimes. Um, Very chatty, like just chatting with a friend. That was remarkably not scary, actually. Um, and then we'd get down to playing, and then she was just always, and she'd go, "I wonder, maybe you should try it like this." Everything was always presented like a suggestion, or you could try. I mean, it was never, "You must do it this way," or she really had a very lovely way about her. Very,
About
very
teaching.
kind. Yeah.
What do you think this kind of approach to teach, by how many students would it work well, and by how many it wouldn't, because you need to switch on the despotical teacher who says, "Now you do what I say," and that's if you have an exam in a month,
Yeah.
and it can't go wrong. So by how
Well,
many students
yeah.
really
Well, somebody
successful?
who's very self-motivated and is going to practice a lot without somebody, um, but I think kindness does go a long way, and the encouraging part, um, a lot of people will respond to that. And I think just by the sheer fact of who she was intimidating enough without her having to do that. Um, so it was surprising how lovely and disarming she kind of was. She didn't have to be scary, I guess. I think most people would probably practice pretty hard for her. Because you wanted to please her and go back having accomplished some things that she had suggested.
Yeah, of course. But I remember once I was on a dinner, and there was a conversation between one friend of mine who is very known pianist herself, And the lady, I did not suddenly who she was. I remember it was after Schubertiade, a dinner with the direction. And the talk was about Elisabeth Schwarzkopf and her rather very unfriendly approach to students. Obviously, she was really depressing students and telling, you have no chance, you have no future, and you are bad. So she was really offensive as a teacher. And my friend back then was on her side. She said, musical life is so hard. It's a good approach to train the students to be in confrontation with the evaluation from an instance of authority. It means if they survive this, then they are probably prepared. The other lady who was on the table, I thought she's something like about 70. And suddenly she starts to say words. I'm telling you, literally, I was like involved in my thoughts. And then I hear, when I have been working with Richard Strauss on Electra, and I sit there for a second, and I know exactly she can't be 70 years old. And it was Ingeborg who premiered the Electra.
Oh my gosh.
Richard Strauss. And she said about this nice and kind approach, which was back then really familiar to everybody. So before the Second World War came and all this maybe national socialism mute affection came up with devaluing and degrading another person. So it seemed to be differently in the 20s and 30s before. And she was absolutely against of any pushings and devaluations on students. And that was really very interesting situation to hear, because we can suppose how was it before, but there was sitting on the table this before, let's say this past.
Yes, right.
She worked with Richard Strauss. And then I was really also impressed by her, especially Schubertiade is a very conservative festival where even Brahms is too contemporary, too new, too modern. Nobody wants to listen it. I'm quoting directions of Schubertiade. So they said on another time that people are calling and asking which program is today, or if there's no Brahms, we are gonna come. But even if there's Brahms, we will not come.
Oh my.
And so Ingeborg sits there, who sung the premiere for Richard Strauss, and say, I'm wondering what actually happened on the concert stages. There's so less of contemporary music. I'm wondering, I really want to listen finally something new. Can you suggest me any new composer and program? Where can I listen something what is up to date? And it was someone who was almost a century years old, So to me, it was maybe my most memorable experience which I ever had.
Very memorable.
So indeed, I think this approach of pushing down has something to do with two very fascistic establishments, as well in Germany as also in the Soviet Union, which made the tradition of devaluation to be a part of artistic education. And of course, it is also its part with the Cold War, because we just had to win on any cost. And suddenly the art has become a sport, and everything what is, you just had to do what is required to do on any price. Even if you are dead afterwards, it was fine as long as you win the competition.
Right.
So do you think that the loss of interest with time, especially now by young people on studying music, has something to do with this pushing and sort of uncomfortable approach?
Well, I think Du Pre was probably always nurtured with kindness because she was so easy to teach, probably. So she, and that's probably has something to do with her basic personality too. She just had a pretty sunny personality. I think when I went to Juilliard, there were certainly stories of many teachers there who were very hard on their students. Rose was serious, but he was always very kind. But he told stories about his teacher, Felix Salmon, very, very what you're describing, exacting and kind of mean at times. So, well, I don't know. I don't think the really, really brutal stuff would hold up now because I think kids would report it. I think there's a whole different culture now. Um, so you don't hear about that so much. I mean, the really like insulting conductors, and you just aren't hearing about that it's not as prevalent anymore. It's not as accepted anymore. But there certainly is a very high standard now. So if you are going to make it in any way, and the students know it, um, and yeah, I don't think it's a completely bad idea if somebody truly, truly, truly doesn't have the ability, it perhaps in a kind way, at some point, cluing them in, or saying there's other directions they could go in music or in the arts. But I think people kind of figure it out at some point. Um, you know, there's a very, very high standard now in young players.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. If you think back, we hear from everywhere, everything has changed so much in the classical music scene, everything has changed so much. And lately, I've been to New York in May, and I've spent time together with Shaky and
Oh, you
PJ.
did?
Yeah. And they were really totally demotivated to do anything. They have left New York, and they were really, really down with the mood.
Oh,
And in a way, they've said that it's over, it's gone, the Titanic has sunk. I must say, it felt like, you are on a Broadway, and it felt to me a little bit like on the Atlantis, which is about to disappear. All this pastime,
I
Carnegie
kind of know
Hall,
what
the
you mean.
legends,
Yeah.
shaking himself as he is. When I saw him for the first time, we played together in New Jersey in the Enlow Hall, and he appeared in front of me, and it was this picture which I was imagining of an American artist, American musician. For me, coming from Moscow, and I saw him in his hat and dark sunglasses, and he looked almost like Rachmaninoff, when you saw him.
Yeah.
And it was, and all this is fading. When I was
Yeah.
a couple of years before to Julia just to visit someone, it felt like I am somewhere on a military base, but not in an artistic educational institution. Nothing there has ever reminded me or was equal to what I was imagining about how can it look like. And everywhere is security, and yes, everybody's practicing, but the spirit of art is fading. So, do you feel the same, or is it differently from your point of view?
Well, I do think things are changing. I think COVID had a big effect on artists for one thing, but it was changing before that too. I think at the time that I was at Juilliard, which is the same time Shecky was too, it was sort of the last of that old school way of, I see that now. I didn't know it then. Where I mean, because my dad went to Curtis, I know exactly. It was a very similar situation. You just went to the institution for your lessons, orchestra, maybe some chamber music, and all the only coursework you took was like ear training and theory, no academics, and but you were just expected to practice all day long. And everyone had to find their own apartment. I mean, it was just there was no sense of like a normal college experience or anything like that. And but yet you could be pretty assured you would get a job when you were done. I mean, there wasn't such a glut. I mean, there were a lot of kids, but not like now. I mean, now there is no guarantee whatsoever that anybody graduating, even if they're fantastic, will get a job. There's too many people doing it, and they're all very good. Well, let's just say many of them are. And there just simply are not enough jobs. And the arts in general are not always thriving, as you know. I mean, it kind of it's difficult. It's a difficult field to go into. And so I felt like there was more optimism perhaps at the time that we were studying. There was I do sense that it's a real sort of rat race now. Um,
Yeah.
and yet the level is incredibly high. And there's some wonderful music making going on. But what it's forcing people to do is to get very creative with how they program or how they present themselves. We didn't have to do all that. It was like if you played well and that was all that was required. You had to know your craft, but that would carry you through. You didn't have to promote yourself all that much or know how to even speak well from the stage. Now that's like, of course you have to do that. You talk to the audience, and I mean that's fine. Some people love that. I don't mind doing that, but it's not for everybody. But now that it's like you have to almost, I don't know, social media is a
Yes,
thing
yes, yes,
that
yes,
wasn't.
social media. But I
Yeah,
wouldn't blame the social media. In my
no, no,
eyes, the
no. But
social media, like everyone like to blame the iPhone for for the global dehumanization which is taking place now.
yeah,
And I just don't see the point why it is the iPhone. It's us who are unable to communicate with one another and not the iPhone. The iPhone actually helps to get together with so many people, which we couldn't have reached anytime
that's
before.
right.
I'm born in the late time of Soviet Union, and some we had, the telephone with disc, and it was pretty hard to get together with people,
Yeah,
uncomparable with our conditions today. So the tendency or the change in the society has nothing to do basically with digitalization. I'm really convinced about this point. But what happened with the classical art is something that needs to be really examined by all of us from all sides. Why the interest by just common people is fading so much to
yeah.
the classical music, to the classical writing, to the theater. What is happening? I would
Well,
like
I
to
think
define.
people aren't being educated about it, for one thing. It used to be that we would be taught, I remember it in elementary school, we would actually learn music, like learn how to read notes. That was actually taught. Now, I can't even imagine a grade school somewhere in the United States now for a teacher to take time to actually like have a staff and kids learn how to write notes. This was like a public school, like third grade. We learned to do that. I think people appreciate things they know something about.
Yes,
And if
yes,
you're not being educated to read, reading Shakespeare, I don't know if that's taught or, you know, I just feel like people know and like what they know about. That's one thing. But I also think people have so many choices now of entertainment. I mean, not everyone's going to choose to go to a symphony concert. There is like, it's like become like a smorgasbord of things that people find entertaining. And that didn't used to be such a case either. I think it's a combination of many things, but a lot of it is lack of exposure, I think, as children.
lack of exposure. Do you think if you would go digital and digitalize musical education and classes, it would be better and easier to involve more people on board? And I do mean especially the segment of amateur musicians and music lovers who will be able to attend classes and by development of the platforms, even play together with the teacher online. Is it a possible cure against the deadly illness which is now with our profession?
I don't know because there's something about you. I feel like it's an in-person kind of thing to study, or at least an instrument. Maybe you could learn certain things online, but somebody has to be in the room and correct your form by actually like physically moving your arm sometimes. I mean, you can't just do it by describing it to someone. And there's no substitute for hearing the sound live. If somebody's going to imitate how to sound on an instrument, it doesn't sound as good over Zoom or something. I mean, maybe a fine recording, maybe. But even then, there's something to be said for that imitation that happens in the same room for studying. Now, maybe just to watching performances, that's very inspiring for people to see. And you know, I turn on YouTube and go, I'd like to see Rostropovich play that or whatever. You can, and that's really interesting. But honestly, I don't think there's any substitute for seeing any of those people live in the end either. But it's good. It reaches people. But I don't know about learning so much that way. If you really want to be good, I think you have to be in person studying with somebody.
Yeah, the most important thing, we need to get the audience back to us, back to the hall.
Yeah. It could reach
and
audiences for sure. Yeah.
and that's the most important thing, because if you don't do something, then you're probably not that interested to listen to it. Why
Mhm.
before it was so established to listen, to go to the concert, because many or almost everybody from well-educated society classes were making music at home. So
Right.
they were growing
That's
up
right.
with this. I remember there were memoirs by writers in Russia, how the children were prepared to go and listen a piece of music. It was a month in advance. They have studied the score with their personal teacher. They played together with their parents and brothers and sisters and cousins, and discussing this piece. And just before, after all this has been done, they went to the hall, to the concert, to listen to the
Oh,
premiere.
wow.
So
That's
that was the
really,
kids, how they were so prepared. But if nobody, or just remember, I don't know how it's in the United States, but in Russia, every household is today, we do have a microwave or a computer or a refrigerator. Everyone had a piano at home. And it
Mhm.
was something what was just it belongs to you, your physical belongings. So everyone, no matter what are you doing, if you are a physician or mathematician or whatever, you have a piano.
Yep.
I
Mhm.
simply can't remember a flat in Moscow where hasn't been a piano. But nowadays, I don't believe that so many pianos are at home with people. So maybe is that the key, that to cherish music on stage, you really need to be able or to like to participate in this art in one or another way, even if it's very little bit. And no matter how good you are there, you just need to be in touch with the matter to be able to cherish. Just think, if you do not drink any wine, how can you cherish the
Right. Yes.
good Bordeaux, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
that's what I thought. But now let's get back a little to Juliet. What is the most memorable story from your time in Juliet?
Oh boy.
I see you smiling. It must
There's
be
some good
a
ones.
nice one.
Well, this became sort of a famous Leonard Rose story when I was there, actually, because Leonard Rose had this phrase that he said to all of the students: pull the bow, because his big thing was this beautiful sound that he got. We all wanted to imitate it. And he had an incredibly beautiful bow arm that we all emulated or tried to. And my best friend at Juilliard was a young cellist from Hawaii named Bruce Uchimura. He's a wonderful cellist, but his first lesson with Leonard Rose, he was so nervous that Rose started talking to him about, Bruce, you have to pull the bow. And Bruce got up out of his chair and he pulled Leonard Rose's bow out of Rose's hand. And that went let traveled like wildfire. Just everyone was like, can you believe this kid did that with Leonard Rose? Luckily, Rose thought it was very funny. And he went, no, 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 Bruce, your bow. But it just was one of those. I think they're probably still telling that story at Juilliard because and he I had my lesson right after Bruce, his friend, he came on and went, I just did the most stupid thing with Leonard. But anyway, luckily he had a good sense of, he was a very nice man, as I said, Rose. And I think he realized this kid is so nervous, he doesn't even know what I'm talking about. So that was a kind of a funny thing. There were wonderful, I had a good time. I mean, some people hated it there. I loved being in New York City. I had good friends and we organized fun things to do. I mean, if you're bored in New York, then you're not trying very hard. I mean, there's always something to do. But we all lived in these apartments that we had to find by ourselves. I mean, it's like we were suddenly grown-ups, but we weren't really. We were kids. I mean, I was 18 and suddenly I was like living in this apartment with a roommate and everything, I had to figure it all out, how to cook, how to, all these things. Now, when you go to Juilliard, there's a dorm. There was nothing like that when I was there. A food service was offered. Um, yeah. So it was like we were people living in New York City, and we would just go to the building for our classes or our lessons and our orchestra or whatever. And then we'd go home and live in our New York apartments.
Yeah. Nowadays, young people are very well protected and maybe even too well
Very, yeah.
protected. So
I know. And my parents were like, "Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine." I mean, now they were not exactly hovering. I think today's parents might have a harder time with that notion of, you
and
just
that's
trying to.
really strange. I'm wondering what happened because it's all us people from our time. No one of us has grown up that way. Many of us we were small. There was no phones. There were no computers. Nobody could call and ask, "Did you
No.
find the place you are searching for?" You just
Yeah,
went
you just
out
had
of
to
your
figure it out. Or
house.
I mean, honestly, it's just lucky. I would stop and ask strangers. But you've just figured out how to find places or yeah. Oh, I know
Exactly.
a funny thing that happened. My first year of Juilliard, there was a huge, huge blizzard that came to New York City in that January. And I grew up in Minnesota, lots of snow, didn't phase me, but it's still one for the books. I mean, like there were cabs that were completely buried under snow. You couldn't even see that there was a car there. And the entire city shut down. So I woke up in the morning that happened, and I had a lesson that day with Leonard Rose. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll just have to walk. And Broadway, everything, I walked down the middle of Broadway, like with my cello, like in, trudging through deep, 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 deep snow. Got all the way to the building. It was locked. It hadn't even occurred to me from where I grew up that they would cancel. And of course, that was before nobody had a phone, nobody sent a message saying classes are canceled. I got there, I went, why would it be canceled? Like, duh. I mean, nobody was even walking around New York City. It was like being in an abandoned, and yet I was so naive. It was like, oh, it's a big snowstorm, but I'm sure Mr. Rose will be here. And later I told him about that. He goes, Laura, why would you think I would drive in on a day like that? And it just never occurred to me. Boy,
Would you go?
that took I trudging with your cello in really deep snow. Let me tell you, that's not fun.
No, I can
I
understand
got a
that.
lot of exercise.
As teacher, would you go to despite the fact of the snow, or you would prefer to stay as Mr. Rossi?
Oh, what do you mean? Say
If
that
you
again.
have been on his place, and you would know
Oh,
that the
he
student might
probably
come.
I think he just couldn't imagine anybody would have thought that he would come in. I mean, because the plows hadn't come through. I wasn't even thinking like a driver. I wasn't thinking like a grown up actually. Like no, he lived in Tarrytown, or no, where did he live? A suburb of New York, and so he had to drive in, probably a 45-minute drive. And of course, he wasn't going to do that. The roads were not even plowed, so.
Yeah, but back then, when Mr. Rose didn't come, nothing bad has happened. You just came back home and that's it. But
Yeah.
nowadays, if you do not appear to a class,
Oh,
a
yeah.
huge shitstorm starts.
Oh my gosh.
Parents are writing. Your head of the
Yes.
department is informed. Just
I
one and
know.
another. Teacher was not there, but it's sort of changed the places. And then students in the age after 20 are coming to a class and ask, can I have the fingerings? Can I have the bowings? When are you finally coming and teaching? And I remember it was a year ago or maybe two, a student came to my class with a cup of tea in the hand and not
Oh,
really well dressed. And
yeah.
I thought, just it was like a review back to my childhood in Moscow when we shaking came into the
Yes.
class
Yes.
and
Yes.
shaking out of the class, more or less, either
Yes.
of happiness or total
Right.
depression. But the
Yeah.
shaking was the common self. feeling which we had. And nowadays they're coming with a cup of tea
I know.
and asking when
It's
you finally are going to teach me. And if not, then they will go and report here and there. You are too
exactly. It's
mean
a
or you're too strict.
very entitled. Yes, I agree. There was nothing like that.
What happened? And okay, I'm conservative. I'm Russian. I'm really conservative Jewish Russian musician, and it's fine like this. And even though lately I talked to my younger daughter about my childhood and my experiences, how I was growing up, and then she said, "Mom, have you been around at the Second World War?" Actually,
You're not quite that old.
so yeah, it has changed. But the
It
question
has
is,
really changed.
if
Yeah,
that's a
we would
good
get kind of
change.
dressed up. I got dressed up for my lessons, or at least I looked very nice. And Rose always wore a suit and tie, very elegantly, but all the teachers did. I mean, nobody presented themselves as anything looking sloppy for sure.
But
And the
nowadays
students,
it has changed, right?
oh,
Yeah.
I don't exactly know why that has changed so much. It's very informal.
Yes.
I don't, yes, I find that
And
a little,
I think that it has something to do with decreasing interest in classical music. Also, this trend to go out of the concert hall and perform in different places is good. On the other hand, all of us, we remember our first time in the theater, first time in a concert, a huge hall with beautiful pictures, a
yes.
lustre, heavy curtains with this dark velvet, and you are in the mood. And Russian people or Soviet people, they used to change the shoes in the theaters and
Oh,
change it, and it has something like you are entering a space where another life, another reality is happening. So you have this
yes.
pause out of your daily troubles. If all of us, we leave the concert hall or any artist and we go and play at home in the swimming pool, in the sauna, in the shopping area, it can be good, but it can be also bad because there's nothing special about
Nothing
it.
special about it. I agree. Yes, there's doesn't seem to be the reverence for classical music, or yes, they're trying to make it very accessible. That's the word, accessible. I understand that because everyone's trying to figure out how do we get audiences? How do we keep people interested? But I agree, it's kind of lost its special place in society. Not every experience. I mean, you can still go to orchestra hall and but even that it's become a little bit more like, oh, if you want to wear jeans, that's okay. I mean, that never would have happened for sure. But I understand they're trying to sell tickets. I mean, it's a very difficult dilemma these
Yeah,
days.
yeah. Just before I will leave you into your day and go into my evening, I would like to ask you. I've seen you plaidoyer for women on the International Cello Institute,
Mhm.
women, female students, female artists. So, what do you think? How relevant is it to fight for female rights? How relevant is feminism nowadays in our art scene and beyond it?
You mean as artists or how? Oh,
Both. I'm interested in an answer on both sides because, from my point of view, in classical music, it's pretty hard to be a woman because it's my experience. If you like, you are sort of obliged to dedicate your full life and your identity to the career. And suddenly, if you like to marry, if you like to get children, then you get sort of excluded out if you are in the main time of this career development. So I remember I was quite sponsored as viola student back then, and I wanted to marry my dual partner, and I've got a huge shitstorm and exclusion from every single sponsorships community because I've betrayed the credo and I've betrayed the belief, and I've said I never canceled any concert and I never I've never said I'm not coming and I'm not playing. So why am I not allowed to get children and be pregnant? And that was pretty much of scholarships because I've got pregnant. And I remember one sponsor has called me and said, "Do you think that with what you did, you have shown your respect to us?" And I said, I haven't done anything. I'm still here practicing and playing. So this is in the art. How do you experience this? If the feminism and fighting for the female art nowadays, it's maybe exactly as relevant as before, but just a little different.
Wow, that's pretty. What you're describing is pretty extreme, actually. I haven't heard about that so much, I have to say, in the US. Now, especially with younger women now. For instance, at the International Cello Institute, we have a recital series there, and we had a wonderful cellist, Julie Albers, give a recital, and she was 8 months pregnant. I mean, that nobody blinked an eye. It was so, and I think it's getting easier for women. My experience is showing that it is getting easier. I see a lot of young women who are married, have children. Somehow they're still managing. I don't know if they're having big solo careers as much, but certainly orchestral careers and busy lives in classical music. What's hard is if you have a partner who's also a musician, and then what if one of you gets offered a job? That is where it gets super tricky. I see this all the time, hearing about couples where they're both wonderful musicians, and one of them gets a great job offer. Does the other one give up the job they have to move? I mean, that is what I think often comes up. Someone usually does have to end up giving something up. Sometimes it's the husband, though.
Exactly.
It's not always, I will say, often they'll go whoever has the better job, actually. But I mean, obviously, it's a heartbreak and a disappointment then for the other person. I know that it used to be way harder, way harder. Even when I was a student, I remember people saying, well, you'll probably get married. I'm sure you'll still play the cello. But I remember a few people saying that. Most people didn't. But, and I would kind of look at them like, wow, I'm not going to quit. Well, I mean, that struck me as pretty strange when somebody would say that. I think maybe it's changing now, or maybe it's just changing in the US. I don't get the sense so much. I think if you're good and you play an audition and you're the best player, they're going to pick whoever's the best, and they're not going to care if it's male or female. I really feel at this point that's probably how it would happen in an orchestral audition, but I don't know.
So the feminism is still relevant or either less or more?
Well, I think people are trying very hard to be quite fair about it now in the US. I mean, I can only speak for here, what I've observed. There's a lot of women who are getting great orchestral positions. I mean, like really major ones. And then there's a lot of young, like for instance, I think she's fantastic. The young woman who just won the Queen Elizabeth competition, Hey Young Choi, cellist. Oh my gosh, is she fantastic? Keep your eyes out for her. I really think she's extraordinary. The competition just happened this last June or May or June. There are some really, really amazing young women. I sure hope there's nobody saying she got first prize. I mean, she's going to have a career. She should. There's still at the top tier. There still seem to be more men that are touring. I don't know if that's just they happen. I don't know why that is, but I think that's changing, starting to change, because there are some amazingly talented young women who absolutely play every bit as well.
So maybe we can easily let this by side. There is a sentence that nobody who is in a life danger is an atheist. Everyone starts to believe in God and pray.
That's right.
Whichever God it is.
Yeah.
And no happily alive woman who is happy with her life is really insisting to fight for the emancipation.
That's right. That's right. I would say so. If she's got a husband who's supportive and isn't going to tell her, no, you can't do that, or even would be willing, if she got a great opportunity, would be willing to accommodate her. No, then she wouldn't have any reason to fight. But that I understand that's not the case for everybody. I'm sure that still isn't the case for many people. But I do think society overall has come a long way, at least American society. I do sense that people are trying very hard to be more fair and equitable overall. I mean, there's always exceptions, but I get the sense that you know, people realize now that it's a problem, has been a problem historically.
So now we are coming slowly to the end. Please say something to the young artists, young cellists, young musicians. What would you wish them to do? What would you suggest? How would be your wishes and guidelines to all of them who are starting their path?
If it's something that you simply must do, like you can't imagine not doing it, then you should do it. If you have other things that tug at you and you can envision yourself not being a cellist, then don't. But it has to be something that's like a burning desire that nobody could talk you out of. And because I know nobody would have been able to talk me out of it. There just simply wasn't anything else I wanted to do or I was as interested in. So it wouldn't have done any good if someone had said, you really shouldn't do that. I still would have done it. And so I think that's a question worth asking yourself because it is hard. It's really hard. Practicing is not always fun. There's a lot of not very glamorous things about it. But if the good outweighs the bad and you have this burning desire to do it, then do it. Go for it. Because there's a life in music is actually quite a wonderful life, despite things that are scary and not fun and just stage fright. There's all kinds of things that are not particularly fun, but if playing the repertoire feeds your soul and playing music, that there are way worse things you could do with your life than that. So I guess I would say it has to be something that feeds your soul.
I do agree completely. And for the last, as I always close the interview, you are free to ask me any question in return. Now we switch to.
Oh my gosh. Oh. Well, okay. So tell me about your career. Like what are you currently doing? How do you spend your time?
Well, that's longer than one question.
I know. But I figure. Can you tell me in like a paragraph? Probably not.
Paragraph. I was at the establishment of the New Academy in London 2 years ago, and I've recorded several Isai sonatas on the viola and published this. I've done pretty nice different recordings and transcriptions as well. I've edited several cello sonatas and variations for the viola and piano, and it also been published. And despite that, I've started to focus more on critiques and writing because I've got fibromyalgia, and it's not that easy to play a lot as I did before with this. So I don't. Suddenly, I was writing and playing from my very early stage of my life, like from age of 3, and then it came actually very naturally that I started to write more than play, and I keep it this way. So to me, to prepare a recital, it's physically quite demanding. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started to not only advertise, but also write for Fanfare. And so I've got time because there were things happening with Ukrainian students I've had in London school. And I thought, you know what, actually, I've played so many concerts in my life. I've recorded 5 or 6 albums, and I'm happy to sit down and write critics, reviews, and interview people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. So you said you studied in London. So,
No, I haven't studied. I taught in London. I have
oh,
established together with other people a new academy, which is called London Performing Academy of Music 2 years ago. I've
oh,
studied in Moscow and in Vienna and in Madrid and in Cologne, but I've
oh,
never
that's,
studied in England.
oh,
I
so,
was just recording in England every time because I was recording for guild music, and then I've changed to even to divine art, and my sound producer is Michael Ponder. So all recording things have been always in England, in London, but I've
oh,
never studied there.
I'd love to hear you play. Is it
I
possible
will
to
say,
send me a link or whatever?
I will certainly, I will
Yeah,
certainly
I'd
do.
be very curious.
Thank you so much, and I'm very curious to your new release, and finally to make a review to your release, and to talk to you again about new projects next time at the Fanfare.
Well, thank you. It's been so fun to talk with you and to meet you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much to me too. Have a nice day.